What happens when Hollywood's most respected legend meets late-night television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Clint Eastwood sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to witness one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history. This isn't just another celebrity spat. This is a masterclass in how quickly respect can turn to raw hostility when two entirely different philosophies collide on live television. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two titans clash in ways that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about Hollywood power dynamics. The tension was palpable from the moment Clint Eastwood walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel live stage. The 84-year-old directing legend, promoting his latest film project, carried himself with that unmistakable Eastwood swagger that has defined decades of American cinema. But something felt different about this appearance. Maybe it was the way Kimmel's usual pre-interview banter seemed forced, or perhaps it was the subtle shift in Eastwood's demeanor as he settled into the guest chair, his steely gaze already measuring his host with the same intensity he once brought to Sergio Leone westerns. Well, Kimmel began with his trademark smirk. Look who decided to grace us with his presence. The man with no name himself, though I'm sure you've got plenty of names for me already. The audience laughed, but Eastwood's expression remained stone-cold serious. He adjusted his position slightly, a movement so subtle it might have been missed by viewers at home, but anyone familiar with Eastwood's body language could read the warning signs. This wasn't going to be another softball celebrity chat. Jimmy, Eastwood replied, his gravelly voice cutting through the late-night atmosphere like a blade. I'm here to talk about my film. That's what we agreed on. The response was measured, professional, but there was an undercurrent that suggested he wasn't in the mood for Kimmel's usual antics. The host, however, seemed determined to push boundaries from the very beginning. Oh, come on, Clint. Loosen up a little. We're just having fun here, Kimmel continued, his tone already taking on that condescending edge that his critics often point to. I mean, you've been making movies since, what, the Civil War? Surely you can handle a little late-night television. The joke fell flat with portions of the audience, and Eastwood's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Those who knew the actor-director's work understood that beneath his calm exterior was someone who demanded respect, especially from those he viewed as lacking substance. The interview proceeded with Kimmel asking standard promotional questions about Eastwood's latest directorial effort, but his delivery carried an undertone of mockery that seemed to grow with each exchange. When discussing the film's themes of redemption and moral complexity, Kimmel interrupted with a joke about how, back in your day, good guys wore white hats and bad guys wore black hats, but now everything's so complicated. Eastwood paused for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed not just the words, but the dismissive tone behind them. Young man, Eastwood said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of decades in the entertainment industry, you might want to think before you speak about things you clearly don't understand. My generation didn't just make entertainment. We made statements. We took risks. We challenged audiences instead of spoon-feeding them whatever tested well with focus groups. The comment hung in the air like smoke from a gunfight, and suddenly the studio felt much smaller than it had moments before. Kimmel, rather than recognizing the shift in atmosphere, doubled down with a laugh that sounded increasingly forced. Oh wow, we're getting some real wisdom from the Old West here, folks. Tell me, Clint, do you ever miss the good old days when men were men and movies were movies? The question was designed to sound playful, but it carried an edge of generational condescension that was becoming harder to ignore. Several audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that something was building toward a breaking point. You know what I miss? Eastwood replied, leaning forward slightly in his chair, his presence suddenly filling more space than seemed physically possible. I miss when entertainers understood the difference between confidence and arrogance, when hosts actually listen to their guests instead of waiting for their next chance to perform their little comedy bits. The words were delivered with surgical precision, each syllable calculated for maximum impact. The studio audience fell into an uncomfortable silence, unsure whether they were witnessing good television or watching a career-ending mistake unfold in real time. Kimmel's laugh became more strained, his usual composure beginning to crack under the weight of Eastwood's intensity. "Hey now, I'm just trying to keep things light here. This is supposed to be fun, remember? Entertainment?" But his defensive tone revealed that Eastwood's criticism had found its mark. The legendary actor-director wasn't just pushing back against individual jokes. He was challenging the entire foundation of Kimmel's approach to hosting. "Entertainment," Eastwood repeated, the word rolling off his tongue like something distasteful. "Is that what you call this? Because where I come from, entertainment requires respect. It requires preparation. It requires actually caring about the craft instead of just looking for your next viral moment." The criticism cut deep, and everyone in the studio could feel the temperature dropping by degrees. The host's mask of jovial professionalism was beginning to slip, revealing something uglier underneath. "Look, Clint, I get it. You're from a different era. But this is how we do things. Now, people want personality. They want interaction. They want—" Kimmel paused, searching for words that might justify his approach without acknowledging the validity of Eastwood's critique. "They want authenticity." Eastwood's response came like a thunderclap in the increasingly tense atmosphere. "Authenticity?" His voice carried a mixture of disbelief and contempt that made several crew members stop what they were doing to watch the exchange. "Son, you wouldn't recognize authenticity if it walked up and introduced itself. What you're peddling here isn't entertainment. It's manufactured controversy designed to generate clicks and social media buzz. You're not a host. You're a content creator, and there's a world of difference between the two." The confrontation was escalating beyond the usual boundaries of late-night television, and both men seemed to realize they had crossed into territory from which there might be no graceful retreat. But rather than stepping back from the brink, something in Kimmel's demeanor shifted toward defiance, as if he had decided that backing down from an 84-year-old actor would be more damaging to his reputation than continuing to push forward into increasingly dangerous waters. "You know what, Clint?" Kimmel said, his voice taking on a harder edge that his regular viewers had rarely heard before. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I am from a different era, an era where we don't just blindly worship celebrities because they've been around since the invention of film. An era where we actually ask tough questions instead of just letting movie stars come on and peddle their latest projects without any pushback." The host's transformation was remarkable. Gone was the affable comedian, replaced by someone who seemed determined to prove he couldn't be intimidated by Hollywood royalty. Eastwood's eyes narrowed to slits, his legendary composure beginning to show cracks as Kimmel's words hit their intended target. "Tough questions?" he repeated, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper that anyone who had worked with him on set knew meant trouble was brewing. "Is that what you call this amateur hour performance? Because from where I sit, all I'm seeing is a man who's confused being rude with being relevant." The studio audience had gone completely silent now, the usual rhythm of laughter and applause replaced by the kind of tension that makes people hold their breath without realizing it. Camera operators adjusted their positions, instinctively knowing they were capturing something that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. This wasn't just entertainment anymore. This was a masterclass in how two fundamentally different approaches to public discourse could collide with devastating results. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, spreading his arms wide in a gesture that seemed designed to claim ownership of his domain. "Look around you, Clint. This is my show. These are my cameras, my audience, my stage. You came here as my guest, and if you don't like how I conduct my interviews, maybe you should have done your homework before accepting the invitation." The words were delivered with the kind of calculated cruelty that revealed just how far the host was willing to go to maintain what he perceived as his authority. But if Kimmel thought he was dealing with some over-the-hill actor who could be bullied into submission, he had gravely miscalculated his opponent. Eastwood sat forward in his chair, his presence somehow becoming even more commanding despite his advanced age. "Your show?" he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that had made him a legend in westerns. "Son, I've been in this business since before you were born. I've worked with real professionals, real artists, people who understood that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. And right now, you're showing everyone exactly why your ratings have been sliding faster than a greased pig down a hill." The mention of ratings struck home like a physical blow. Kimmel's face flushed red, and for a moment his carefully constructed public persona completely crumbled. My ratings are just fine, thank you very much. And unlike some people, I don't have to rely on nostalgia and past glory to stay relevant. I'm out here every night, working, creating, connecting with real people instead of hiding behind some mystique I built up 50 years ago. Connecting with real people? Eastwood's laugh was harsh and humorless. Jimmy, the only thing you're connecting with is your own ego. You think making jokes at other people's expense is the same thing as genuine communication. You think controversy is the same thing as conversation, but all you're really doing is contributing to the noise that's drowning out everything meaningful in this culture. The exchange had moved far beyond the typical celebrity interview format into something that resembled a philosophical battle for the soul of entertainment itself. Kimmel, perhaps realizing that he was being outmaneuvered by someone with decades more experience in handling public confrontations, decided to go for what he thought would be a knockout punch. "Oh, please," Kimmel said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Spare me the lecture about meaningful culture from someone whose most famous line is 'Go ahead, make my day.' You want to talk about contributing to the noise? Your entire career has been built on glorifying violence and toxic masculinity. At least I'm honest about what I do instead of pretending it's some kind of high art." The attack was personal and calculated to wound, but it also revealed just how little Kimmel understood about the man sitting across from him. Eastwood's response came not with anger, but with the kind of cold disappointment that was somehow more devastating than any outburst could have been. "You know what your problem is, Jimmy?" Eastwood said, his voice steady as bedrock. "You mistake cynicism for intelligence. You think tearing people down makes you look smart, but all it really does is reveal how small you are inside. Those movies you're dismissing? They explored themes of justice, redemption, and moral complexity. They asked audiences to think about what it means to be human. What does your show ask people to think about? What lasting impact does any of this have beyond tomorrow's social media cycle?" Kimmel's attempt at a comeback died in his throat as the weight of Eastwood's words settled over the studio. The host had expected pushback, maybe even some heated exchanges, but he hadn't anticipated being systematically dismantled by someone who wielded words with the same precision he had once brought to gunfights on the silver screen. "Look," Kimmel said, his voice now betraying the first hints of uncertainty. "We don't all have the luxury of being able to pick and choose our projects like some kind of artistic purist. Some of us have to work for a living, have to give audiences what they want, have to what?" Eastwood interrupted, his patience finally reaching its breaking point. "Have to sell your soul for ratings? Have to compromise every principle you might have once held for the sake of staying relevant? Jimmy, I've been poor, and I've been rich, and I've learned that there's no amount of money or fame worth sacrificing your integrity. But looking at you right now, I'm not sure you ever had any integrity to sacrifice." The words hit Kimmel like a physical blow, and something in his expression shifted from defiance to barely controlled rage. The host's hands gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white with tension, as he struggled to find a response that would salvage what was left of his dignity. But Eastwood wasn't finished delivering his verdict on what he saw as everything wrong with modern entertainment culture. You want to know what's really tragic about all this? Eastwood continued, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience in an industry that had changed beyond recognition. You actually have talent. I can see it buried under all this manufactured controversy and cheap humor. But instead of using that talent to create something meaningful, something that might actually matter, you've chosen to become exactly what's wrong with this business. You've become a parasite, feeding off other people's achievements while contributing nothing of lasting value yourself. The studio had become a pressure cooker, with tension building to levels that made everyone present acutely aware they were witnessing something unprecedented in the normally controlled world of late-night television. Kimmel's face had gone through several shades of red, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a venom that shocked even his own production staff. You know what, Clint? You're absolutely right. I am a parasite. But at least I'm not a relic clinging to relevance by lecturing people about the good old days that never actually existed. At least I don't have to hide behind some tough guy persona I built playing pretend cowboy in spaghetti westerns. The attack was designed to be the ultimate insult, but Eastwood's reaction was not what anyone expected. Instead of exploding in anger, he became perfectly still, his eyes focusing on Kimmel with the intensity of a laser beam. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet that the studio microphones had to strain to pick up every word. "Jimmy," he said, each syllable delivered with surgical precision, "you just made the biggest mistake of your career. You see, I came here tonight willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. I thought maybe underneath all the cheap shots and manufactured controversy, there might be someone worth talking to. But what you just said tells me everything I need to know about who you really are." Eastwood stood up from his chair, and the simple act of rising seemed to transform the entire dynamic of the studio. Suddenly, he wasn't just a guest on someone else's show. He was a force of nature reclaiming his dignity. The cameras captured every movement as he adjusted his jacket with the kind of deliberate care that suggested he was preparing for something significant. "You want to call my work pretend?" Eastwood continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Those spaghetti westerns you're so quick to dismiss explored themes of justice and moral complexity that clearly went right over your head. Those characters I played weren't just tough guys. They were men struggling with questions of right and wrong in a world that had forgotten the difference. But I wouldn't expect someone like you to understand that, because understanding requires depth, and depth requires humility." Kimmel tried to regain control of the situation, his voice becoming increasingly desperate. "Oh, come on, Clint, don't be so dramatic. This is television, not Shakespeare. We're all just trying to entertain people here. There's no need to turn this into some kind of morality play." But Eastwood was far from finished. He took a step closer, to Kimmel's desk, his presence filling the space between them with an electricity that made the air itself seem to crackle. "Entertainment?" he said, his voice carrying decades of authority. "You think what you do here is entertainment? Jimmy, entertainment is supposed to elevate people, to make them think, to give them something to aspire to. What you do is the opposite. You drag everything down to the lowest common denominator and then act like you're doing the world a favor." The host's composure finally cracked completely. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Kimmel shouted, his professional facade completely abandoned. "You think you can come on my show and lecture me about how to do my job? You think your old-school Hollywood bullshit still matters to anyone under the age of 70? Newsflash, Grandpa. The world has moved on without you." The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down in an Old West saloon, and everyone in the studio seemed to hold their breath waiting for Eastwood's response. But instead of the explosion they expected, Eastwood's reaction was far more devastating. He smiled. Not a warm smile, but the kind of cold, knowing smile that promised consequences. "You know what, Jimmy?" Eastwood said, his voice returning, to that dangerous whisper. You're absolutely right about one thing. The world has moved on. It's moved on from respect, from craftsmanship, from the idea that what we do in this business actually matters. It's moved on to people like you. People who think being loud is the same as being right, who think controversy is the same as content, who think tearing others down is the same as building yourself up. Eastwood began walking toward the edge of the set, each step measured and deliberate. But here's what you don't understand, son. Just because the world has moved on doesn't mean it's moved in the right direction. Just because something is popular doesn't mean it's good. And just because you have a television show doesn't mean you have anything worth saying. Kimmel, realizing that his guest was preparing to leave, made one final desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Wait, Clint, come on, let's not end this on a bad note. We can agree to disagree, right? This is all just good television, right? People love this kind of back and forth. But Eastwood stopped and turned back to face him one last time, his expression carrying the weight of final judgment. No, Jimmy, this isn't good television. This isn't entertainment. This is exactly what's wrong with this entire industry. You've turned human interaction into a blood sport, and you've convinced yourself that the applause of strangers justifies the damage you do to real people. The legendary actor-director paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the studio audience, the cameras, and finally settling back on Kimmel with unmistakable disappointment. I've spent my entire career trying to tell stories that matter, trying to create something that would outlast the moment it was created. What you're doing here won't be remembered next week, let alone next year. It's just noise, Jimmy. It's just meaningless noise. Kimmel made one final attempt to regain control, his voice cracking with desperation. You can't just walk out on my show. You signed a contract. You have obligations. Eastwood's laugh was sharp and final. Obligations? The only obligation I have is to my own integrity. And staying here another second would be a betrayal of everything I've worked for. You want to know what real strength looks like, Jimmy? It's knowing when to walk away from something that's beneath you. With that, Clint Eastwood turned and walked off the set, his departure creating a vacuum of silence that seemed to suck all the energy out of the studio. The cameras followed him as he moved through the backstage area, his posture straight and his dignity intact despite the chaos he was leaving behind. Kimmel sat at his desk, his face a mask of shock and humiliation, as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The studio audience remained silent, unsure whether they should applaud, boo, or simply sit in stunned acknowledgement of what they had witnessed. The host's attempts to make light of the situation fell flat, his nervous laughter echoing in the empty space left by Eastwood's absence. Well, folks, Kimmel said, his voice hollow and defeated, I guess that's what happens when you try to have a real conversation with a Hollywood legend. We'll be right back after these messages. But even as he spoke the words, everyone present knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. The confrontation had revealed something fundamental about both men, and about the industry they represented. As the show cut to commercial, the studio remained frozen in the aftermath of a collision between two very different philosophies of entertainment, respect, and human dignity. Eastwood's exit had been more than just a dramatic television moment. It had been a statement about the cost of compromising one's principles in pursuit of ratings and relevance. The legendary actor disappeared into the night, leaving behind a studio full of people who had just learned the difference between manufactured controversy and genuine consequence. His final words echoed in the silence, a reminder that some things, integrity, respect, and human dignity, are worth more than any television show, any ratings point, or any moment of viral fame. In the end, Clint Eastwood had done what he had always done best. He had made his point, stood his ground, and walked away on his own terms, leaving everyone else to contemplate the wreckage of what happens when respect collides with arrogance, and dignity refuses to be diminished. By the desperate need for attention,